supply chain bottlenecks are jeopardizing Europe's net zero targets. Stefan Benett is managing director with Inverto, leading the energy practice area. Hello, Stefan.
Hello,
Thank you
how
very
are
much.
you?
Good. Thank you very much for being with me. Stefan, how are supply chain shortages affecting the rollout of renewables in Europe and progress toward hitting net zero emissions targets?
Robert, what we see is, of course, a massive investment in energy networks, energy infrastructure across many different European countries. And while we see these investments taking place over the next couple of years, we also see increasing lead times and shortages on key components of the electrical infrastructure. So many procurement teams need to manage this on a long-term basis, very strategically, very carefully. We talk about cables, high voltage cables. We talk about transformers. We talk about also certain service categories like installation services. So we see in large, significant investment pipelines, which change the game, so to say, for many of the companies.
Well, okay, so you've mentioned high voltage cables, you've mentioned transformers. Also, I understand that rare earth magnets are an issue as well, correct?
Can you repeat the question?
Rare earth magnets are also, I'm trying to understand what are some of these essential components that are needed
Yes.
for the energy transition to net zero.
I think the interesting part is that for many of these complex systems, the bottleneck is not so much the resources and the raw materials, but it's to a large extent the production capacity that we see all over Europe. So companies are fully booked. So therefore, the suppliers also have a very strong market position in some instances, and it's definitely needed to develop your supplier portfolio, to develop a forward-looking strategy in order to create competition among your supply base and in order to create a strategic relationship with your key partners. Yeah.
Okay, but how can businesses strike a balance between managing cash flow on one hand and stockpiling some of these key components and raw materials ahead of any potential supply issues?
Yeah. I think this is a very critical question. And you see, for some of these projects, you have a multi-year lead time, right? And I think what you need to do is to manage the key risks associated with these projects through a clear definition of roles and responsibilities among the buyer and the owner of projects and the supplier. And you need to as well define the key components of the contract. You need to make sure that you avoid unforeseen risks, that you can manage cost escalations carefully, that you select partners which you can rely on. And sometimes also you need to carefully develop new suppliers well in advance of upcoming projects.
You say develop new suppliers. There definitely is a trend among companies these days in order to resource or shift their supply base in some cases. How can so-called nearshoring and friendshoring of supply chains ensure that these renewable projects are safeguarded? What progress do you see is being made on this front?
That, of course, is a very relevant question. I mean, in many instances, Chinese suppliers, Asian suppliers have been an option, and energy is a critical infrastructure in many countries, considered a critical infrastructure. Therefore, I think this limits the options. But nonetheless, I think you have the opportunity to reach out to partners in Southeast Asia, for example, in other parts of the world, to selectively qualify partners in geographies which can be considered friendshoring. And the other thing is, of course, that for these complex supply chains, you also need to maintain a certain connection with the partners to manage design changes, to manage close collaboration. And therefore, as you pointed out, developing your supply market in the neighboring regions is a key challenge and a key requirement for every company.
So you do believe that there are alternative suppliers for graphite, for gallium, for germanium, and the like, and critical minerals such as those?
I think this is, of course, another question which is addressing other layers of the supply chain, other levels for specific components and key elements, also for hydrogen supply chains and others, or other electrical systems. And in that sense, of course, the challenge is, of course, that many of those are typically bought in China, and it takes some time to develop additional sources of supply. I think there are some that are being developed also specifically in Europe. And it's simply also critical to, on one hand, secure supply on a longer term, but also to select and track the let's say evolving suppliers. Yes, new mines, new resource operations opening up to basically secure the supply. Yeah.
All right. All of this suggests that there's going to be intense competition for these alternative supplies. How then can a company seeking these supplies negotiate directly with raw material suppliers to ensure that they become the customer of choice rather than losing out to competitors?
Yeah, I think we have multiple opportunities, and we also see this in several projects. You can think about a long-term agreement. You can develop joint ventures in some of the areas. It's definitely required to develop a longer-term perspective. A customer of choice also needs to provide a perspective on his business opportunities, on his long-term track record. So be prepared to share your strategy with your partner, to convince them on a strong collaboration. And also you need to involve top management to ensure that you are equipped to provide long-term commitments with your partners. I think this is really important. Some of these components are maybe still let's say procured on liquid markets, but others, of course, require strong end-to-end interaction. And there are multiple instruments that companies leverage, as I said, long-term agreements, joint ventures, sometimes even vertical integration, investment into joint production facilities. And it is required simply to think about all these opportunities when dealing with strategic partners.
All right, we've outlined a number of challenges to Europe's efforts to achieve net zero emission targets. Do you believe that these challenges are going to slow down this progress, or do you think they can be addressed and that Europe can stay on schedule to meet these net zero emissions targets?
I think this definitely creates a challenge going forward for the, let's say, to meet these targets, simply because we see investment volumes going up, price increases, and we also see sometimes delays in projects taking place. So definitely that has an impact. Especially as many of these investments take place in parallel. Nonetheless, I think we might be in a different position in the next 2 or 3 years, as procurement teams definitely address the challenge. We see also suppliers expanding capacity. Therefore, in some of these markets, I'm also confident that we see a certain improvement, but it may take a couple of years depending on the different markets.
Stefan Benett of Inverto, I want to thank you so much for joining me to talk about this issue of meeting net zero targets in Europe and what are some of the challenges that stand in the way of that goal. Thank you very much for being with me today.
Thank you very much. Have a good day, Bob. Thank you.